There are so many early stage technology companies, startups all over the world who are basically reinventing ways to make fuels, chemicals, products, materials, working on recycling, waste to energy and value. There are literally dozens upon dozens of what I would call sectors or segments within sustainability and decarbonization.
Hey guys, and welcome to the Grow IT podcast. Your host here, Alessandro Cutri, joined today by John May, the managing director over at Hamilton Clark Sustainable Capital. Today's going to be an interesting episode. We're going to be diving into a little bit about his story, some interesting insights into the space, and much more. So definitely make sure to stick around. But without further ado, I'll kind of just pass it on over to you, John, if you don't mind just introducing yourself and then telling the audience a little bit about your backstory and how you got to where you are today.
Sure, Alessandro. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
So I work for an investment banking firm in the US called Hamilton Clark Sustainable Capital. And there's kind of an interesting origin story to the firm. Our founder and president, John McKenna, was a partner at Lehman Brothers and head of the Houston office. And back then he was working on oil and gas projects. And when Lehman closed their doors during the financial crisis, he took the money that he had made at Lehman and decided to do something which had not been done in about 30 years on Wall Street. And that is, he set up a new investment banking firm. And moreover, one which focuses exclusively on sustainability, decarbonization, the energy transition, green tech, clean tech, et cetera. And for your listeners who aren't zeroed in on that space and want a bit further explanation, what I would say is the energy transition space is enormously important to the planet. People that read their newspapers see that there are these targets for decarbonizing almost every industry on Earth by 2030 in order to keep the planet from overheating and creating devastation like, well, for example, what we saw with the LA wildfires. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know if that was caused by global warming or not, but it certainly could be. Yeah, and that's not good, obviously. So, but what's really interesting about this sustainability and clean tech sector is there are so many early stage technology companies, startups all over the world who are basically reinventing ways to make fuels, chemicals, products, materials, working on recycling, waste to energy and value. There are literally dozens upon dozens of what I would call sectors or segments within sustainability and decarbonization. And I think the main thing I've learned at Hamilton Clark is that you need to really understand the sustainability sector to go out and help these early stage tech companies raise capital. Yeah. And that's what an investment bank does, is it raises either equity at the corporate level or project financing. Yeah. And then the third thing we do is we have a mergers and acquisitions advisory practice, which has become more relevant lately just because many of the early stage tech companies that come to Hamilton Clark for their initial funding, they might do a Series A or B equity round, and then they may go directly to selling themselves to an oil and gas or chemical company. And if you think about it, The oil and gas and chemical companies are too busy continuing to power our world
Yeah.
to spend a huge amount of their time on reinventing themselves in some kind of sustainable or decarbonized way. And so the value that these early stage technology companies provide is they are the ones who originally think up most of the ways to decarbonize almost every industry. And so, I can go uh, broader in just one sense and say, yes, we're decarbonizing the fuels industry, we're
Yeah.
decarbonizing the chemicals industry, but also other industries that aren't um, thought of as being decarbonization candidates, if you will. So
Yeah.
almost every product, material, um, uh, chemical is basically being reinvented in some kind of decarbonized way. And
Yeah.
it's not being led by the strategic players in oil and gas and chemicals. It's being led by these brilliant young people who are basically coming out of university or grad school, many of them with chemistry and engineering
Yeah.
degrees, and they're reinventing ways to decarbonize these sectors.
Now, what would you say that's one of the biggest trends that you're seeing right now within, within this sector? What are some of the trends that you're noticing within the renewable, space?
Yeah, great question. So I'll pick a kind of an odd one to mention first. So I didn't realize until I got to Hamilton Clark that the real estate industry, um, meaning large companies that develop homes, apartments, warehouses, um, large projects for different companies. Um, in the process of constructing these huge projects, and there's a fun name for this called the quote built environment, meaning everything that's built on the
Mm-hmm.
planet essentially is emitting carbon emissions. And
Mm.
so um, builders, developers, uh, project people are constantly thinking of new ways to reinvent the way that um, traditional building materials are manufactured. Things like cement, um, coal definitely needs to be decarbonized completely. It needs to go away.
Yeah.
And a host of other traditional carbon-based industries that have been around for 100 years.
Yeah.
They're all looking to decarbonize, and so it's an endless um, opportunity for some young people to come into the space and get involved, either working for these early stage technology companies, um, if they have the degree and they have a chemistry or engineering background, or they might be hired by oil and gas and chemical and strategic players that have been around for a long time, but are too busy pumping out oil and gas and chemicals to spend a huge amount of their time on decarbonizing that very sector.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's very fascinating, right, to see the evolution of this, right, to see where we continue to go and kind of where the next 5 to 10 years will continue to look like, especially with all these bright, like you mentioned, a lot of bright young people coming up with these new methodologies, to do some of the things that you're mentioning. But I want to transition just a little bit, John, just into your background, because you've obviously been managing director now for a while here, and that's part of your career here. And so I'm just curious to get it from you, when it comes to things that have kind of served you well throughout your career, things that maybe mantras that you've lived by, things that have really helped you. What advice would you be able to give to other managing directors, at maybe other investment banking firms that's really served you well, throughout your career?
That's a really interesting question. I think what I would say is I started out my career as a practicing lawyer, believe it
Mm.
or not. And um, I practiced with several firms, including some well-known firms. But after a while, I started to get bored with it in the sense that it was the same thing over and over every day. You know, you're
Yeah.
drafting some sort of document, right? And and um, and I remember I saw the original movie Wall Street with Michael Douglas, and I
Hmm.
was thinking to myself, "Wow, this investment banking thing is sexy. It's interesting.
Uh-huh.
It's obviously fast paced, and there's a lot of risk involved." And so, for somebody who'd been a lawyer for a while and was getting kind of bored with the law uh,
Hmm.
and basically just papering other people's transactions, um,
Yeah.
I decided to go back and get my MBA. And I did get my MBA in finance. And then I got a job um, with Bank of America. Um, and I made a career change, but not when I was young. I mean, I was a lawyer for a good 15 years. So, um, in a way, the best break I ever had in my life,
Hmm.
Alessandro, was getting a job at um, a Bank of America, that they're all over the country, right? But in my hometown of St. Louis, and they
Yeah.
said, "Okay, John, we'll take you on and see if you can be a banker." And
Yeah.
I worked at it pretty hard, and eventually started to really enjoy it a lot more. And the thing that I enjoyed the most was that through your own effort, you could create a success. You could
Yeah.
work with a company, coach a company, you know, uh, be there for everything that they need, and then you could help them raise that critical amount of money that they needed to get established and get started up and get going. And then
Yeah.
once you get the company going, they're going to want to build full commercial scale projects, which is a whole other kind of financing that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And I'll close with this section with talking about probably the best thing I ever did in my career was when I was working on the early biofuels and sustainable aviation fuels
Hmm.
companies. And the first several projects that I ended up financing, several of the projects when they were built did not work. And I remember coming home to my wife and saying, "My career's over." And she said, "John, you're already sweaty and dirty. Get back out there and fix the problem." And what ended up happening was I happened to be traveling to New York City for a conference, and I met with some guys for lunch, and I was telling about my problems, and they said, "You know, the insurance industry could create a new kind of insurance policy that would address the scale up risk of many of these sustainable technologies." And when they said scale up risk, they're talking about going from pilot or demo scale to full scale,
Yeah.
and maybe more than one full scale. And so what came out of that was the best thing I ever did in my career. And that was inventing the idea of technology risk insurance as a way to de risk the scale up of first of a kind renewables and clean tech and energy transition companies. In fact, I got an award from the International Air Transport Association in 2019 for the innovation of creating the first technology risk insurance policy.
Wow.
My last point on this, and I'll turn it back to you, is the reason that it's become such a big deal is that every major industry on the planet is reinventing itself in some kind of decarbonized way.
Mm.
But these companies don't necessarily know if the first time that they build a decarbonized version of themselves,
Yeah.
whether it's going to work at commercial scale. And
Mm.
what the insurance does is it provides essentially a backup plan where if the corporation tries to build a first of a kind sustainable aviation fuel project and it doesn't work for some reason, the insurance company does two things. They can provide money to the company or the developer to help fix the problem. But if they can't fix the problem, and the project only works at, say, 80% of the original intended capacity, the
Hmm.
insurance policy pays off the debt portion of the project financing, and that prevents the bank or the private credit lender who provided the debt from foreclosing, and it preserves the ownership in the hands of the original developer, and it gives developers a second bite at the apple. And that's incredibly important because so many projects, when they're first built, don't work the way they're
Yeah.
supposed to. And
Yeah.
if that would bring each project to a dead end, because it didn't work for some odd reason, and
Yeah.
you would have the developer complaining to the contractor and the
Uh-huh.
contractor complaining to the developer. But I think this is an elegant solution, if I might say, because it gives almost every industry the freedom to fail and
Yeah.
still be successful.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's one of those things that is probably, as it continues to go, is going to become pivotal to the growth of the industry as well. Being able to have something in there like like you mentioned, and I'm curious to get like your perspective when it comes to like what ways are you guys like the next like you never like to look too far out in terms of 5-10 years, but the next 12 months, how are you guys looking to position yourselves and capitalize on some of this? Opportunity, or what's the vision look like for you guys over at Hamilton Clark?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Um, I think one thing that you hardly ever hear anybody talk about is that um, even people who read, the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal every day, they're focused on the hot companies at the moment, like the AI companies that are out, like NVIDIA and others. And so, those are the sexy, darling companies that everybody's talking about and that the newspapers are writing about. But, what we do at Hamilton Clark is we basically raise capital for almost unknown companies that are
Yeah.
just starting out. But for whatever reason, they've found a way to decarbonize or make more clean energy than they would otherwise. And there seems to be a huge number of institutional investors, which I define as private equity, venture capital funds,
Yeah.
um, ESG or environmental, social, and governance funds like the Bill Gates Breakthrough Ventures, which is
Hmm.
invested in so much decarbonization and buying carbon offsets to provide capital to companies so they can slowly over time decarbonize what they're doing, but they can't do it immediately. So the
Yeah.
richest man in the world is, or one of the richest men in the world is actually trying to support the climate revolution and the energy transition. And to me, that's incredibly important
Yeah.
because if we left it just to the early stage companies, these people are more like your age. They're the people that run these startups are in their 20s and 30s, and
Yeah.
there's usually one man or woman who's got the brilliant idea of, okay, we're going to make X into Y,
Hmm.
and then they get a bunch of other people. But the excitement of going into the market and then trying to find the right investors, it's like a matchmaking process of,
Hmm.
for the company trying to find the right investors that
Yeah.
like the management team, like the technology, are willing to put a serious amount of money out, millions
Yeah.
of dollars.
Yeah.
And so to me, it never gets old because you're
Yeah.
always on the tip of your seat saying, if I'm talking to a set of investors on behalf of a company and their CEOs or CFOs on the line, I'm very worried about massaging that conversation and making sure it goes as well as possible
Yeah.
because, and this is something that no one ever talks about, but it is very easy for private equity and venture capital and similar funds on the investment side to basically say, no, 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 I'm not interested in this particular company. And for the founders, mostly these young people, um, it's totally demoralizing.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, it's almost like you're on a team where it's the client and the investment bank, and you're working to find these investors, and you have one call after another. These are all video calls, right? And so you get into
Yeah.
a lot of granularity. You can put
Yeah.
financial models up. You can talk about, how the technology works.
Yeah.
Uh, it's endlessly fascinating, and but it's very tense because, and you don't hear about this either. I think there's a lot of private equity and venture capital people that are genuinely afraid, Alessandro, that
Mhm.
if they invest in a startup company and the technology does not scale, that they're going to be fired by their private equity or venture capital fund.
Wow.
And so my final point on this is straightforward. You know, you can't you can't make sure that in all cases the investors that we introduce to these companies are going to love the company. And
Yeah.
many times they don't love the company, but you don't know exactly why.
Mm.
Sometimes they give you a lot of false rationale. Well, they're too early, they're too late.
Yeah.
The management team's too young. They need more board members that are in their 50s and 60s. There's a million critiques that come from the investors.
Yeah.
But in the end, I think that each investor looks for a certain mix of things, and on any given day, they could say yes or no to the same opportunity. That's
Huh.
how fragile the green transition economy really is.
So fascinating. Yeah. Yeah, and the role that you guys are playing, right? And I think you bring up a great analogy in it, right? Like being the matchmaker, right? And being able to massage the deals that do happen. And there's something like doing something like that will definitely keep you on your toes, right? I can see how it can be exciting and bring a lot of energy and life to what it is that you're doing. And you guys are on the forefront of all this technology and all this new stuff coming out. And so there's just a lot of excitement around everything, and being that facilitator, right? It's almost being that matchmaker. I love the way that you've put it in that sense. But it's exciting stuff, right? It's exciting stuff to be a part of. And for a lot of listeners tuning in, I'm sure that they see the passion also that you come and have as well when you talk about it. So it's been a pleasure, man. It's been a pleasure, John, hearing a little bit more about your story, hearing exactly what you guys are doing. It sounds like something definitely exciting. I always love to end with more of a loaded question, towards the end here. And you've done a lot throughout your career, right? You obviously started more as on the lawyer side, and then you moved into investment banking, and you've been in the industry now for almost looks like around 20 years itself. If you had to, rewind the clock back, and let's just say you were able to speak to your younger self, let's just go maybe 20 years before you even started, investment banking. What advice would you be able to give to your younger self?
I would say, believe in yourself more. Don't be intimidated too easily, and wear your confidence proudly. Um, don't be afraid to make mistakes, um, and show humanity for the other people that are involved in the process. If you show them that you really care, not just about the almighty dollar, but that you're worried about the process itself, and you want to be respected and you want to respect them, that comes through in a million little ways that um, differentiate how you as a professional or I as a professional are operating. And in the end, it's all about raising money. And what you want to do is not go to sleep at night thinking that you didn't serve the client well, you upset the people, or that you didn't, you just didn't sync with them. So we go out of our way to try to really understand where these people are coming from and not label them. And I think that we're in a labeling society where people get a
Yeah.
first impression and then they just stick to it and that's it. And what you see with these companies is there's an evolution to them. And
Yeah.
they may look straightforward and simple at the beginning, but over time they end up becoming brilliant people that actually change people's lives.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, and probably a better point to end on, John. I'm looking forward to continue to see what you guys are going to continue to build over at Hamilton Clark. And if people are listening to this and they're interested in reaching out to you or your team, what are the best ways to go ahead and contact you guys?
Well, sure. Our website is Hamilton Clark, no E on Clark, all one word.com. So yeah, this has been so much fun, Alessandro. I'm grateful to you and your partners for having me on today, and look forward to future discussions.
Of course, man. And if you guys are listening to this, make sure to go check out John. I'm also going to include his LinkedIn here for you guys to be able to go connect with him, as well as the website. If you guys didn't make it all the way to the end, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. Thanks again, John. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Cheers, everyone.